So many things in our existence escape our understanding. As humans, we have only been around for the blink of an eye. There are many things we still do not understand about ourselves or even the world we live in. Many times in our history, we have come across things we can't outrightly explain. These can be anything from lights in the sky to strange creatures or even people. Many are stories born out of urban legend or fear. One thing is for certain, that they have some foundation and that they had to come from somewhere. Some of these are encountered by multiple people, lending to even more credibility. Two of which are the subject of this week's episode. Two things that have appeared not only at small junctures in time, but have spanned decades and have been encountered internationally. And one can only begin to wonder if the two are tied together, or even one and the same. I'm your host, Nick, and this is Chapter 26 of the Insidious Agenda podcast, the story of the Mothman and the curious case of Indrid Cold. The first reported sighting of the Mothman was on the 12th of November in 1966. It was witnessed by a group of 5 men who were digging a grave in a cemetery in the town of Grinning. They witnessed a brown human being fly right over their heads from a group of trees, disappearing out of sight. Nothing more than the strange encounter occurred that day. On the 15th of November, 2 sets of young couples from the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, burst into their town's courthouse and began making what appeared to be outlandish claims to the sheriff. The Scarberrys, Roger and Linda, as well as Steve and Mary Millette, would tell the sheriff that they were out driving around in Roger's black 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air. At around midnight, they saw something. It was a large, white creature that leered at them with glowing red eyes. It was a slender, muscular man about 7 feet tall, with white wings. Well, that was the description that Linda gave. They encountered it standing on the side of the road in a place known as the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. Or to the locals, it was commonly called the TNT area of Mason County, the site of an old munitions plant from the Second World War. Terrified, they immediately left the area and sped off. The creature followed them. It showed that it had the ability to fly at speeds close to 100 miles an hour. The group did admit that the creature was a bit of a clumsy runner on the ground. They made it back to town, parking just on the outskirts. They realized that at some point in their escape down Highway 62, that the creature had given up its pursuit. They wanted to face their fears and turned the car around to head back to the TNT area. No sooner did they get close than it was on them again. They again sped off down Highway 62 with the creature in tow. It didn't stay around long, as it was discovered the creature had an aversion to the car's headlights. It immediately made a vertical climb into the air at a surreal speed and disappeared above the tree line. As the UFO craze was a hot issue at the time, either Roger or Steve was able to confirm that it was more like a bird and definitely wasn't a flying saucer. The sheriff, George Johnson, would dismiss the encounter as a type of heron that he called a shite poke. Roger knew better. He knew that this creature wasn't a figment of his imagination. If I had seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything, but there were 4 of us who saw it. The next morning, a press conference was held by the sheriff's office. The couple's story was picked up by a local newspaper called the Point Pleasant Register the following day. They would use the headline, "Couples see man-sized bird, creature, something." In the article, the sheriff's office asked anyone who had any information or experienced future sightings to come forward immediately. That evening, Linda Scarberry had to be rushed to hospital by her father after experiencing a nervous breakdown. Roger would say, "I'm a hard guy to scare, but last night, I was for getting out of there." When it began to gather more attention, a newspaper in Ohio would label the creature the Mothman. It was believed that the newspaper coined the name from DC Comics, combining their well-known and then extremely popular hero Batman with one of his nemesis, the killer moth. Sometime during that winter, Dr. Robert Smith, a professor of wildlife biology at West Virginia University, put forward the suggestion in the Gettysburg Times that the creature was likely a sandhill crane. Though not common to that area, their size normally measures around 6 feet tall, with a wingspan of 7 feet, and they have reddish flesh around the eyes. The report of red eyes would have made sense, as the glow of red was only ever noticed when the headlights shone on the creature. Within 3 days, there were 8 more reported sightings of the Mothman. Among them were 2 firefighters who saw a very large bird with red eyes. A resident of the nearby town of Salem, West Virginia, Newell Partridge, was relaxing at home one evening. He noticed strange patterns appearing on his television screen, and a bit of distortion began to set in. The television emitted a sort of high-pitched whining noise that left Newell confused, and his dog barking as though it were possessed. Newell became even more frightened when he heard a strange sound emanating from just outside his house. When he went to investigate, he shone a flashlight in the area it was coming from and noticed something staring back at him. It was large and had 2 red eyes that resembled bicycle reflectors staring back at him. Newell would also make note that there seemed to be strange red lights dancing around the area. The creature took off, with Newell's German Shepherd close behind. He would go out the next day to look for the dog, but never saw it again, possibly having been taken and eaten by the Mothman. Many locals had shown up to take part in a manhunt for the creature near the TNT area. All were armed, of course. Their search wouldn't really bear fruit, and they weren't able to find anything more than circumstantial evidence of the creature. An investigating deputy named Millard Halstead found a cloud of dust that he believed could have been caused by the bird. Also, he found a strange set of footprints that he believed didn't match any creatures in the area. These couldn't really be accepted as evidence of the Mothman, as they weren't directly observed phenomena. Over the course of the next year, scattered sightings of the Mothman began to make their way through the area. Though it was never found, many locals believed that it took up residence in an old nuclear power plant on the outskirts of Point Pleasant. Conspiracy theories erupted, with some believing it to be Cold War fears, while others thought it may be an escapee of a top-secret government experiment. Though there continued to be sightings, they would eventually cease. Tragedy would strike the area on the 15th of December in 1967. The Silver Bridge, which carried Route 35 over the Ohio River between Point Pleasant in West Virginia and Gallipolis in Ohio, buckled and collapsed during an intense volume of rush-hour traffic. Keeping in mind, the bridge was built many years before, when the average weight of a common vehicle, like the Model T, weighed around 1,500 pounds, compared to an average weight in 1967 of 4,000 pounds. The lost bridge aside, 46 people lost their lives that day, 2 bodies of whom were never found. The cause of the bridge collapse was determined to be from a faulty I-bar suspension chain, but it didn't stop the legend of the Mothman, or the accompanying conspiracy theories from gaining traction. Some, even believing that the collapse of the bridge was caused by a sonic boom from the Mothman's wings. Locals began to note other strange things happening in the town. Legend has it, the people of Point Pleasant began to notice the appearance of mysterious men wearing black suits in the area. This certainly would seem like the kind of event that would capture the attention of the men in black. If you haven't listened to it already, I recommend you go back to chapter 13 and listen to our entire episode dedicated to the men in black. Known witnesses who had come forward claimed to have been harassed by the men in black, who warned them to forget what they saw and speak nothing further of the creature. The legend of the Mothman would only grow to new heights after it was picked up by author John Keel. Having a genuine interest in extraterrestrials and paranormal events, in 1975 Keel would pen the novel The Mothman Prophecies. In the book, Keel believed that the coming of the Mothman signified doom and foretold the collapse of the bridge and the loss of life. Without the popularity of the book and the eventual movie of the same name in 2002, the legend of the Mothman may have never been anything more than a local legend. The town of Point Pleasant would greatly benefit from the movie release. Annually, it draws around 10 to 12,000 tourists chasing the legend of the Mothman. Much like the people of Roswell and its surrounding areas, Point Pleasant has embraced the legend, going so far as to open a Mothman museum and research center, in addition to erecting a 12-foot-tall metal statue in 2003. But what if this wasn't where the legend of the Mothman ended? Could it be possible that there is more than one? There have been other events in history where the Mothman has been seen prior to a major disaster. Even predating the initial sightings, in 1966 were reports from people in the area surrounding the Shunte Dam in China that come from as early as January of 1926. As they called it, reports of a man-dragon began to rise in early January, prior to the collapse of the dam on the 19th, which caused 15,000 people to lose their lives in the flooding. The next time a sighting was made was in 1978 in the town of Freiburg, Germany. On the morning of the 10th of September, a group of miners grabbed their things and began heading to their mine for a hard day's work. As they approached the entrance, they saw what appeared to be a man wearing a long, dark trench coat. They couldn't place why the man was there, and a few workers went to investigate. As they drew within a few feet, the man flung open his trench coat, which was actually a pair of massive wings. They stood there, awestruck at what they were witnessing. After a few short moments, it let out a series of ear-piercing shrieks. The miners would only be able to describe this as the sound of 50 men screaming, with the sound of a train's emergency brake screeching. Absolutely terrified, the miners fled. At a safe distance, they would continue to observe the creature that they called the Freiburg Shrieker. It folded its wings back around its body, as it had been before, and continued to stand, motionless, in front of the mine. It was their hope that if they turned their attention to tasks outside the mine, that the creature would eventually leave. It's still unknown as to why they kept this to themselves, and didn't alert any of the local authorities. After an hour from when they first encountered the creature, sounds began to erupt from within the mine. The ground began to shake, and a massive subterranean explosion was heard. As the men began to rush toward the entrance, the creature had mysteriously vanished, as smoke and fire bellowed from the mine's entrance. After the follow-on investigations were complete, it was determined that had the 36 miners gone into the mine that day, they would have certainly perished. No evidence or trace of the creature was ever found. The next major sightings came just before the disaster on the 26th of April in 1986 in Chernobyl and Pripyat. Workers at the power plant in Chernobyl would report they witnessed something that would eventually be called the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Those workers in the power plant's control room who were unfortunate enough to see it would suffer terrifying dreams and even receive threatening phone calls. It appeared to them, rising over the horizon, a hideous, humanoid creature with giant wings, bearing a black, headless body and red, glowing eyes. The arrival of the blackbird, or the Mothman, again served as an omen. It predicted the unimaginable disaster that would follow. Those who survived the initial blast and subsequent fire stated that they witnessed the blackbird gliding through the plumes of smoke and wreckage coming from the destroyed reactor number 4. All of those men would eventually succumb to radiation poisoning. The next time the Mothman was reported to have made an appearance was on the 11th of September in 2001. Eyewitnesses to the tragic events that day have stated they saw something flying parallel to the second aircraft that hit the World Trade Center. Following this, those same people claimed to have been visited by the men in black, ordering them to keep quiet about it. In 2007, it would appear before the collapse of the I-35 West Bridge in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Before the collapse, reports were made up to a month in advance of the event, which would claim the lives of 13 and injure another 145. The witnesses to the creature claimed to have seen a humanoid figure flapping its massive wings in the area and even resting on the bridge itself. The Mothman also foretold the swine flu outbreak in La Junta, Mexico in 2009. Two witnesses to that appearance, Angela Mendez and Viviana Ledesma, heard something screeching from an apple orchard near the Menaka Cemetery. A different student stated that it chased him for 15 minutes. The authorities could find no trace of the creature afterward. It was also seen in advance of the Fukushima disaster in 2011 in Japan. The most recent sightings of the Mothman were in the late 2010s in Chicago, where reports were made of a red-eyed, winged humanoid that invoked a security response at O'Hare International Airport. But over this period of time, the Mothman was not the only person, creature, thing that was confounding humanity. The next part of our episode deals with the person, or the entity, known as Indrid Cold. About a month before the famed second sighting of the Mothman, another strange encounter was had, just up the eastern seaboard from West Virginia, in the state of New Jersey. On the 16th of October, in 1966, Martin Munov and James Yanchitis, who were commonly known as Mouse and Jimmy, were walking home along 4th Street in the town of Elizabeth when they noticed something strange. There was a man who looked to be surreal, standing along the side of the road opposite of a fence. As they drew closer, the boys noticed he was wearing a metallic green suit. More frightening than his appearance was the fact that he locked eyes with them and bore on his face a large, unnerving smile. "Jimmy nudged me," said Mouse. "Who's that guy standing behind you?" I looked around, and there was, behind that fence, just standing there. He pivoted right around and looked right at us. Then he grinned a big old grin. The boys were nervous and didn't know what to make of the man. When he came over the fence and began chasing them, there was only one thing they could do: run. It wouldn't be until later, after getting away from him, that the boys would recall more terrifying details about their encounter. The man was unusually tall and had facial features that were unnatural. He didn't have ears or a nose. Only a few weeks later, on the 2nd of November, a sewing machine salesman named Woodrow Derenberger of Parkersburg, West Virginia, was making his way home down Interstate 77 after a business trip to Marietta, Georgia. He had to make a quick stop to readjust a sewing machine that was rattling around in the back of his truck. When he began to make his way back onto the road, he noticed strange lights ahead of him. He began to slow his vehicle to a stop, believing the lights to be the police. As he would soon find out, it wasn't. Before his eyes, a strange vehicle appeared in front of his truck. It was truly peculiar. It was like an old-fashioned kerosene lantern chimney, Woodrow said, flaring at both ends, narrowing down small, and then enlarging into a great bulge in the center. Next, Woodrow noticed someone emerge from the vehicle. It was a tall man with an inhuman grin. He looked perfectly natural, Derenberger said. As natural as any human being. His face looked like he had a good tan, a deep suntan. He was not too dark, but it was just like he had been out in the sun and had a good tan. His hair was combed straight back, and it was a dark brown. He seemed to have a good thick head of hair. His eyebrows, his face, his features were all very normal. I don't believe that he looked different from any other man you'd meet on the street. He approached the truck, and Derenberger began to notice more. The fact that he had a large grin and kept his arms folded, with his hands up under his armpits. As he began to speak telepathically with Derenberger, he noticed that his smile never wavered. He asked me to roll down the window on the right-hand side of my truck. I did what he asked, and this man stood there. And he first asked me what I was called, and I know what he meant, my name. I told him my name, and then he asked me, "Why are you so frightened? Don't be frightened. We wish you no harm. We mean you no harm. We wish you only happiness." I told him my name, and when I told him my name, he said that he was called Cold. Indrid Cold. After a short conversation, Indrid Cold informed him that this would not be their last meeting, and he would be back to speak with him again. During their conversation, which lasted only 5 or 10 minutes, Indrid revealed that he was from the planet Lanulos in the Ganymede galaxy far away. Indrid would return to his spacecraft and leave. The next morning, Derenberger would report the story to the police in Parkersburg. This would take a stranglehold on local media attention. He agreed to take part in a live television interview. Others taking part were the state police, representatives of Wood County Airport, the Parkersburg Police, and an Air Force representative from the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, having traveled in from Dayton, Ohio. For the next 30 minutes, Derenberger was borderline interrogated and battered with questions. His interview would also convince others to come forward with their own encounters of a man who appeared similar to the description of Indrid Cold. One man stated that a similar person tried to flag him down, but he was too afraid to stop. Others claimed to witness the same lights and vehicles on the same road that he talked to Cold on. Witnesses even came forward to confirm the story, stating that they had seen Derenberger speaking with a strange man at the time of the incident. The stories of the encounter would linger on in the papers for the next 3 weeks. Even though Derenberger was forgotten in the media's eyes, it didn't stop Indrid Cold from coming to visit. Over the next month, Derenberger was visited multiple times. Indrid was even witnessed by several other family members. Unfortunately for Woodrow, the encounters would begin to affect him negatively. He began to seek medical attention, but was given a clean bill of health as doctors found no evidence of any chemical imbalances in his brain. He would write a book about his encounters with Cold, but it only made the situation worse. His family received many harassing and threatening phone calls blaming Derenberger and his encounters with Cold on their misfortune. He began to suffer from terrible headaches and depression. Eventually, his wife would divorce him, and he was forced to move out of Parkersburg to escape it all. At one point during their visitations, Woodrow claimed to have gone with Indrid to live at his homeworld for a period of 6 months. A third sighting of Indrid was in the town of Point Pleasant, which had already experienced its fair share of urban legends and excitement from the sightings of the Mothman. Indrid Cold was encountered by the Lilly family. They had previously been experiencing poltergeist activity in their home. Linda, the family's daughter, awoke late one night to see a man standing over her. It was a man, a big man, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. I screamed again and hid under the covers. When I looked again, he was gone. At this point, we can bring the Mothman Prophecies writer John Keel back into the fold. When Keel was conducting his investigations into the Mothman legend, he began receiving mysterious phone calls. On the other end, the man would introduce himself as Indrid Cold. They would have conversations of a great many things, during the last of which, Cold would inform Keel that he needed to run away because a terrible disaster was about to happen. When Keel was in the process of leaving, the collapse of the Silver Bridge happened. Ever since, Keel has purported that the Mothman and Indrid Cold may be the same entity. Just like reports of similar creatures to the Mothman were making waves around the world, other encounters with entities like Indrid Cold also began to escape the eastern United States. Reports of a giant prowler with a fixed grin began to run rampant throughout 1966 and 67 in Provincetown, Massachusetts. An Italian night watchman claimed to have been abducted in December of 1979 in Italy. A Connecticut woman in the 1980s claimed to have seen a grinning man. Even as recent as 2009, a man near Roswell, New Mexico, witnessed a bald, grinning man who stood more than 6 feet tall and was wearing a sparkling green jacket. He didn't stop his car, but was informed that when he got to town, he had just missed a UFO. So these encounters with the Mothman and the strange entity Indrid Cold leave everything up to our imagination. More perplexing is the idea that the two may be linked together. Did the Mothman exist to warn us of pending UFO encounters and to be wary of entities like Indrid Cold? Or did Indrid Cold exist to warn us of the Mothman? Either way you look at it, both can be true. The Mothman is or was an entity witnessed by many people across the world, normally preceding some kind of accident or great misfortune. He appeared in this manner every time, foreshadowing the doom that would follow. Whether or not the Mothman brought the disaster with it remains to be seen. But either way, everything points to it being a harbinger of doom. Indrid Cold normally followed reports of UFOs or other alien activity. Though pleasant seeming in demeanor, we will never truly know his intentions. The only thing we do know is he had an average appearance with a terrifying grin. It seems as though he may have been something akin to other entities like the Men in Black, but as though he were something else entirely. John Keel even brought forward the idea that the Mothman and Indrid Cold were the same. In all honesty, we'll never know. As the great Charles Addams once said, normal is an illusion. What is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. So here, we bring to close the stories of the Mothman and Indrid Cold. I hope you enjoyed the two creepy subjects of today's episode, and I had a great time learning about them in more detail. Before you go, remember to leave us a quick review and to subscribe if you liked the episode, so that way you can find your way back next week when we open the next chapter of the Insidious agenda and discover the story of the haunting of the Snedeker family, the true story that inspired the haunting in Connecticut. New episodes of the Insidious Agenda podcast release every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But for now, it's time to close the cover of the Insidious Agenda. I'll see you again next week, and thank you for listening. Stay spooky.